Welcome to Lecture 2 of Chapter 1, the Human Body and Orientation, Part 2. So what we're talking about here is what's necessary to maintain life. So this is things that all living things have to do to be considered alive. So first one, you need to maintain boundaries. There has to be some sort of like me versus the space around me, right? A cell membrane or my skin, right? What separates me from like my countertop or what separates me from even my pen, right? That's maintaining boundaries. I have to have some kind of boundary to separate like me from that. Next one, I have to be able to move. So there has to be some type of movement. If I take a plant, right, that we know is living, it has boundaries, right, and think of movement, and I turn it, the leaves will actually move towards the sun. So let's say I have a plant and I turn it, and its leaves currently are this. Then I turn it, its leaves are now facing away from the sun, they'll move towards the sun again, right? Take all your houseplants and give them half a turn, and you'll see that they look different than they looked before. And then slowly the leaves will move towards the sun. So you need to be able to move, and not only move like that, but also like move substances through you somehow. You also need to be able to respond. So if I walk over to you and flick you, you look at me and go, what? Right, that's responsiveness. If I, like I said, turn the plant, it responds to light. There are certain plants that like twist their vines around stuff. That's the plant responding to light and shade patterns, all right? So you have to be able to respond to the environment and somehow react to that. You have to be able to, in some way, digest or break down and absorb nutrients. You have to take stuff from the surroundings and make it part of you, okay? You have to be able to metabolize. So metabolizing is having chemical reactions in your body. So you're going to break down really complex molecules into smaller ones and take smaller molecules and build them into more complex molecules. Okay, it's part of being able to grow because you have to take stuff and make it. So metabolism is taking things and making them, or taking things and breaking them. So if you make it or break it, you're doing metabolism. All right. Next, you have to be able to excrete things. So excretion is one of our functions. So you have to in some way be able to get waste out of your body. All right, so eliminate waste from your reactions. So waste in humans is removed through urine and feces. Plants, oxygen is waste for plants, so they let it out through the leaves, right? We happen to like oxygen, so it works for us, but it's still a waste product for plants. So you have to be able to excrete your waste. And then you have to be able to reproduce. Everything alive reproduces in one way or another. You can either reproduce sexually, which you then need two parties, male and female, right? Or you reproduce asexually, which then you just kind of bud. Like think of a, have you ever had a spider plant that was pot bound, meaning it was like too big for its pot and it has all those like little spider babies? That's asexual reproduction. It's gonna rain here, I hear lightning. A tomato plant, if you cut it and stick it in water, right, it gets roots. That like new baby would be asexual reproduction. And then our last one, you have to be able to grow, which we talked about grow when we talked about metabolism, right? You need to be able to make or break things. So you have to be able to increase in size. So cells are going to increase in size, and you're going to increase in the number of cells if you're multicellular. Okay, so you have to be able to grow. So those are all our necessary functions for life. Maintain boundaries, move, respond, digest, metabolize, excrete, reproduce, grow. 8 of them. So on top of things necessary to show that you're alive, there are certain things you actually need. So if you're a living organism, which we just determined from the last slide, there are 5 different things you need to stay living. So these are considered survival needs. Notice my daughter walking in the background. All right, I can't even see you. Oh yeah, and my son. So the first one is nutrients. So you need some kind of molecules to get your body bigger. These would be nutrients. These are chemicals used for energy or for building cells. Okay, so carbs, proteins, lipids, vitamins, and minerals are all considered nutrients. All right. Next thing you need is oxygen. Oxygen is necessary because you need oxygen to make ATP. I don't know why this doesn't say that, so let's add that on there. There we go. Make ATP. You need oxygen to make ATP. All right. So if you don't have that, you can't do that. Next one, water. Water is going to make up 60 to 80% of your body weight. It's actually the most abundant chemical in the human body, and it's going to control a lot of the reactions that happen in your body. A lot of them are hydrolysis, meaning you add water and it breaks things, or you take away water and it makes things. So water is really important for us. Next one is stable body temperature. So we all know our body needs to run at like 98 degrees, right? 98 point whatever. The reason why we need a stable body temperature is, oh, children. This is my life. So the reason why we need a stable body temperature is because that's the temperature. Hey, that's the temperature that our enzymes work at. And if our enzymes aren't working, our reactions won't happen in our body. So you can't break down food, you can't make things. It's really important that our enzymes work. And 98 degrees is where they work the best. Last one, atmospheric pressure, which is like the strangest of all the survival needs that your book mentions. I don't know why, I just find that. But for atmospheric pressure, you need that because atmospheric pressure is necessary for oxygen and carbon dioxide to go in and out of your lungs. So I know when you think of breathing, you take a deep breath in. You think you kind of suck air in. What really happens is you make your chest cavity large and air rushes in because we have atmospheric pressure. And then when you breathe out, right, you really think you're pushing air out. What you're really doing is you're taking your chest and you're crunching it, like if you take a bottle and you squeeze it and then the water pops out the top, right? You're kind of crushing the cavity, which then in turn pushes the air out. It all has to do with atmospheric pressure. So if we don't have the correct atmospheric pressure, it's difficult for us to breathe appropriately. Sorry about the kids. They're gone now. Next, homeostasis. So homeostasis is maintaining a stable internal environment. All right. This is going to be a state of equilibrium or balance. That's why we have this scale here. It's necessary for our body to work appropriately and for us to maintain life. All right. Homeostatic imbalance is mentioned throughout the book in these little like red blurbs as you read it. Okay. And that's when we somehow leave homeostasis. Now, if you look at this picture, it shows you the different parts of the kind of homeostasis equation. All right. When we're talking about homeostasis, the first part we have is the stimulus. Okay. This would be the thing that our body senses. So a hot stove would be a stimulus. Let's do this. Fire. Fire, that's fire. A hot stove, stimulus. Okay. When I touch the hot stove, right, my hand, that's my hand. I don't write on the computer, right? That's my hand. It has receptors in it. The receptors detect the change. So now my hand is saying, you touched a hot stove. Okay. The input is the information that is sent up to my brain. That would be an afferent pathway. Okay. Afferent pathways are sensory neurons. Sensory neurons are in your senses. So I have a stimulus, I have a thing that's a problem, right? The receptor, let's say my hand, the sensory neurons in my hand are going to touch the fire, and the input is the information that's sent up my sensory neuron to my brain. My brain is the control center. Okay, sometimes it's just spinal cord. Let's keep it easy. Let's say brain. Okay, the brain then sends a message, an output down your efferent pathway. Efferent would be your motor neurons. My motor neurons then go to my effector, which would be like a muscle, right? And that causes a response. So hand touches the stove, sends a message up my sensory neurons to my brain or my spinal cord, otherwise called your interneurons. Let's add that word in there. All right, otherwise called my interneurons. My interneurons, my brain, my spinal cord processes it. They send another message, an output, down my motor neurons, which go to my muscles that say, get your hand out of the way, you're touching a hot stove. Okay, so stimulus is sensed by the receptor. We go up an afferent pathway to our control center. We go down an efferent pathway to our effector, and it causes us to move. That's homeostasis. That's how we maintain homeostasis. All right. A disturbance in homeostasis results in a disease. That one with that homeostatic balance bullet, but I didn't know it was there. Sorry. Okay, so we talked about kind of the different ways homeostasis works. This slide is just what I said earlier. It just doesn't have the picture. So maintaining homeostasis. So our body is going to communicate through nerves and hormones. All right, that's using nervous system and endocrine system that we talked about last time. And these are the different parts of that scale. Okay, these are just giving you specific like definitions for each part rather than what I was saying. Add this to it. So the receptor responds to the change or the environment, the change in the environment or the stimulus. The like lights coming in weird, right? And it's going to send information along the afferent pathway, right? So it's going to send it up to the control center. The control center determines like what balanced is. It analyzes the information and then it responds. That would be like your interneurons, your brain, your spinal cord. It then sends messages to the effector, which is going to be how you respond. So it could be an organ where it releases more hormones. It could be a muscle where it makes you move your hand. So it's going to provide the means of a response to the stimulus. So its information is going to flow down the efferent pathway. So we have afferent pathway to control center, efferent pathway to response. Okay, that's what I talked about last slide. This is just written so that you can see it easier. Next, feedback mechanisms. So there's two different types of feedback. Feedback is how we maintain homeostasis. Negative feedback, which includes most of your responses, all right? It shuts down the original stimulus and it reduces the intensity of the stimulus. It works like a thermometer. It gets too hot, it turns off, right? And then it cools down, it turns back on. It gets too hot, it turns off, and then it cools down and it turns back on, right? That's negative. It negates the stimulus. Positive feedback, slightly different. It increases the stimulus and makes it go further and further away until some type of reaction happens. So negative feedback goes like this, back and forth, right? That sunlight's terrible. Slide over. Let me get out of my window. There we go. Positive feedback, a little bit different. Okay, positive feedback is worse and worse and worse, so it's going to cycle. Here comes normal, cycle, cycle, cycle until something makes you go back to normal. All right, we'll discuss this in class more. It's way better in an in-person lecture, so you can ask specific questions as they happen. Last but not least, body cavities and membranes. So when we look at our body, it's divided into cavities or areas. All right, you have two body cavities, dorsal and ventral, so front and back. Dorsal body cavity, the back one, has two divisions. You have your cranial cavity, which is your brain, protected by your skull, and you have your spinal cavity, which is where your spinal cord stays, and it's protected by vertebrae. Your ventral body cavities also has two divisions, sometimes three, depending on what you're reading. You have your thoracic cavity, which is going to be the area above the diaphragm, right? It is going to be protected by the ribs. So wherever your ribs are is going to be your thoracic cavity. In there you have your heart and your lungs, right? You have things like your aorta and your vena cava, all right? And you have the mediastinum, which is going to be a central area in the middle. It's an even kind of deeper cavity, so the mediastinum is within the thoracic cavity. And it's going to be the cavity that houses the heart, the trachea, and some of the other vessels. Okay, below the diaphragm, so below the ribs, the area of your abdomen that is not including ribs, okay, that's going to be your abdominal pelvic cavity. Our book combines them both. Some books do abdominal and pelvic. It just depends on what you're reading. So this is going to be below the diaphragm, Your top of your abdominal cavity is going to contain stomach, liver, pancreas, gallbladder, small intestine, large intestine. I think that's all of them. Spleen, kidney. I think now it's all of them. And then the bottom half is going to contain your bladder, your rectum, which is the ending of the large intestine. It's going to contain your reproductive organs. Okay. Your pelvic cavity, the bottom of the abdominal pelvic cavity, is protected by your hip bone. That's where your reproductive organs lie, right? The top half doesn't have any protection. It's protected by your abdominal muscles. Okay. There's no separation between the abdomen and the pelvis. That's why they now kind of combine it into one, into abdominal pelvic cavity. So your abdominal pelvic cavity can be divided into 9 regions for when you discuss it. Okay, so you have like some directional terms on where things lie. All right, what you have for regions, you have your right hypochondriac. So hypo is below. Chondriac means cartilage, so it's going to be below your ribs. Okay, you have your below like the cartilage ribs. You have your epigastric. Epi is going to be above the stomach. Okay, left hypochondriac. What I want you to notice is this left region is on my right. We're in anatomic position, which means you're talking about the patient's left, which is opposite your left. I know you've all heard about that before. Then if we go down a line, we have our right lumbar and our left lumbar. Okay, that's the lumbar region where your lumbar vertebrae are found. That's why it's called lumbar. It's the lumbar area of the back. All right, umbilical is over the belly button. That's where your umbilical region is. Then on the bottom, you have your right iliac and your left iliac. All right, that's part of the hip bone, the ilium. So the right and the left iliac are going to be behind, kind of, or hugged within the ilium. And then underneath you have the hypogastric. Hypo means below the stomach. Okay, those are your 9 regions. These are the different organs in them. We'll talk about those in class so you can get specific organs in specific regions, but take a look at the picture. Know some regions, know some organs in the regions so that when we discuss it in class, you can give me some input. Okay. Last slide is about membranes. So all of our body cavities are lined by membranes. Membranes are going to allow for lubrication, allow for movement within the cavity, and they help protect the cavity. Okay, these membranes are called serous membranes. They're in pairs, so there's 2, and they're separated by serous fluid. So we're going to have a layer, and in the middle here we have serous fluid. Okay, your inside layer closest to your organs is called your visceral layer. Your outside layer is called your parietal layer. Okay, so visceral means guts. It's within the organ. Guts, G-U-T-S. It's going to be the one touching the organ or touching your guts. Parietal is the outside. There are specific membranes for areas. So the peritoneum, you have visceral peritoneum, peritoneal fluid, parietal peritoneum. That's going to do the abdominal cavity. Around the lungs, you have the pleura. So you have visceral pleura, pleural fluid, and parietal pleura. That covers the lungs. Around the heart, you have the pericardium. So you have visceral pericardium, pericardial fluid, and parietal pericardium. Okay, so those are all your serous membranes and serous fluid. We'll talk about that in class 2. Ask me if I don't mention it so I can explain to you in more detail. All right, next you're going to have a question about the lecture, so make sure you go back and check all of the slides and have all of your notes ready so you can answer the questions. Good job, guys.